is natural farming a kind of overly romanticized idea that people in the UK kind of dream about, but in reality, does it even work? Is it a waste of time?
Yeah, tough question. I kind of went into this when I started with a similar idea. Was this just a romantic idea? Is it something that can be used in a business sense? Is it something that can be used in someone's like kind of domestic garden? And so when I first started this, I very much went into this with the idea that this had to be a business, and we are a business. And after 4 years of trialing and kind of persevering, I think it's a system that works beautifully with that business idea. We're quite extreme. We don't have polytunnels because we're trying to find a way that we can grow without keeping nature out, which is the defining thing. But so I guess we kind of like hamstring ourselves a little bit by not having those polytunnels yet, which is why we're going more into perennial foods. But I think seeing the nature come back and actually recognizing any landowner or any kind of person who works on the land, I think we're in a position now in our world that we have to allow every single space to be some sort of habitat or ecosystem, because it's just running out so quickly. I think we're in our 6th extinction level now and everything like that, that bringing all that biodiversity back, I think, is a really important factor that often gets swept under the rug, and what we found is that by cutting out certain crops that just waste time and don't work in the system and focusing more on the things that do work for us, we're building a really good farming model that also builds and protects biodiversity. You go in the field and you'll be picking and you'll lift up a lettuce and there'll be a hedgehog under there, or you'll trip over a bank of weeds and then grass snakes will come out. And I think that is just as much as part of the success as the crops as well, really.
And you said to me earlier today, we had a lovely walkabout, and I'm just stunned, to be quite honest with you. One of the things that kind of struck me is what you said about you actually being a beetle farmer. I've never heard of that before.
No, I joke.
Why is that?
So beetles are really the kind of, if you exclude like the soil microbes and the fungi and that, from a ecosystem point of view, I think the beetles are the foundation to build on.
Interesting.
Beetles start, for me anyway, how I see it, is beetles are the start of that kind of like ecosystem equilibrium that we're always trying to find. And because of that, slug is our biggest predator. Like everyone's experienced this year especially, slugs just decimate everything. And I think they're always seen as the villain, and they're always seen as the kind of like I would say, how people see natural farming not working is because of slugs. So what we have to do is focus on beetle populations. And so really a lot of the decisions we make, whether it's from our agroforestry or field layout or kind of habitat control, is really to build beetles. That's what we focus on as the farmers, and that's why I joke that we're beetle farmers, because we're doing everything to maintain those beetle populations. And then really from building those beetle populations up, it's almost like, kind of flicking the dominoes, building them up, build something else up, and then very quickly you start to rebuild that ecosystem. And then you find that your slugs are kept in balance. And then the beetles also keep other pests like sawfly in balance, or carrot root fly in balance, or cabbage root fly in balance, because they eat everything in the soil as well. And then from that, you can just build a system that doesn't require so much netting or digging or anything like that, really. And so we leave grass in the field. We create slug habitat because beetles like the same habitat as slugs. They live side by side, and so we almost want slugs, because the more slugs I have, the more beetles I get. And you never want to eradicate the slug. You eradicate the slug, the beetle will go somewhere else to find them. And it's that classic like hero paradox. You need the villain in order to be a hero. And the beetles very much are kind of Batman's and the slug is the Joker. And so, kind of almost reluctantly say that we almost encourage slugs in the system because we want the beetles to have the food as well.
I have to say, I think that's the first time I've heard a grower say, slugs, you need more slugs.
Yeah, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The first couple of years when we took the farm from a pasture, and we turned it into what it is today, it was tough because we just didn't have the beetle populations. It had been a cultivated field, it had been sprayed, it had been it had been everything. that beetles don't want to be in. And it's taken a good 3 to 4 years now for those beetles to come back in such a population that they make a massive impact on the ecosystem. And like I said, like it is honestly like flicking dominoes. Now they've come back, everything's just kind of slotting into place really nicely. And, you know, we can put things out, you know, and like we can put trays and trays of lettuces and onions and brassicas out. And we know that we're going to have probably a 90-95% survival rate from what we put out as well, you know. And you know, you lift up a plank of wood or you move a piece of grass, and there'll always be a beetle or a centipede kind of just scurrying around as well.
I definitely saw the biggest centipede I've ever seen in my life here.
Yeah, no, a lot of centipedes. But we also have to recognise, like, mice and voles are big slug predators. Grass snakes are big slug predators when they're young. You know, there's a lot of things that eat slugs out there. It's just the fact that because we keep so much of that ecosystem out of our food growing, the slugs just have free reign because there's nothing there to eat them. You know, we were talking in the field that, you know, we have an ecologist who helps us to make sure that everything we do is to the best that we can. And we know that beetles have an active hunting range of between 12 to 20 meters at night. And so what we've done is put our agroforestry at 12-meter distances, so at least the beetle can get from one tree row to another at night and not have to panic about getting back in the daytime when a bird could grab it or something else could grab it. So it's decisions like that which are predominantly for the beetles.
Are you more of an ecologist or like conservationist more than a grower?
No, I'm a grower through and through. You know, I got into growing with the idea that I could do something for biodiversity environment. I actually originally wanted to be an ecologist, but I just liked the freedom that horticulture had, that ecology didn't quite match with me. And I kind of find, you know, I could say that I'm like, you know, a wildlife shepherd or a carer, and I think from a human point of view that's quite arrogant. I think that nature knows what to do more than I do. You know, now how I see myself is more just as part of the ecosystem, to be honest. I like what I call like compassionate intervention, you know, intervention where it's more about caring about the beetle and everything like that. And actually I just see myself as the beetle and the vole and the mouse. I'm just part of that ecosystem now. And me taking food from that and growing food for it is my intervention on the land, and I'll do that in the most minimal possible way. So I guess more than I don't know, maybe I see myself as the pig or some kind of animal in part of the ecosystem.
One of the things, just to like jump in on that, is I actually would say like gardeners should almost see themselves as like shepherds of the soil.
Yeah.
Like guide it. It's not to kind of be the boss or the god in a sense. It is to work with and to notice and to change like particular things. And like one of the things that you mentioned earlier as well when we were walking about is that somehow you see the food as almost as a side effect of the work that you're doing here to encourage that biodiversity and bioabundance here. And is that quite a hard thing for other growers to grasp their head around? Because of course, like, to be on, like this is a business. You need to make money. It needs to be economically viable, and so it seems completely like quite I don't know, like quite a revolutionary stance, or to actually take the stage of looking at the ecology and building up that nature and the pest predator balance, more than just trying to do market garden with straight rows and putting in compost and inputs.
I mean, there's a lot of benefits that we had. One was that we were afield and we had the opportunity to do this from day one. You know, I really feel that a lot of established places that have done something for a certain amount of years, very difficult to now be like, oh, let's swap it back. Because you're going to get that but you're going to get that pest pressure straight away. The minute you alter the field, it gets really difficult. And like we had it difficult for a couple of years while it found that balance. So we were really lucky from day one to have a vision of what we wanted to do. And we've stuck on that vision, and we've gone through the hard times, and we've had to swap crops around that got eaten to ones that don't get eaten and everything like that. And so we were very fortunate that we started it from that starting period. Sorry, I've forgotten the question.
No, that's right. It was more of a statement because of being natural and focused on building up the wildlife, and then the side effect is the produce
Yeah, cool. I can go into that.
Yeah.
So we were lucky that we wanted to do this from day one. And so we took the field from a field and turned it into what it is. I really feel for any grower that's had something established that wants to do this now, because you're going to have to take that economic kind of slump for a couple of years while the pests begin to take control and before the predators can come back. And we factored that into our growing. Like we grew certain cash crops we knew that would be really successful in the first couple of years while the slug pressure was quite bad. And now we're at a point that doesn't really matter anymore. And for us, what we found is that by doing this and getting better at it and more experienced, we just don't really care about produce anymore, which sounds totally bonkers from a business food growing point of view. And I love the food and I do care about it, but it's not my biggest worry anymore. It's not like I'm going to put that out and be like, oh, it's going to get eaten. What am I going to do? We just find that we put stuff out, it survives. We don't have to net. We don't have to fleece. Like I said, we haven't committed to polytunnels because we've got a direction we want to take the farm that won't need that. And so really we don't have to worry about the veg anymore. What I care more about is, if I move that, what bird will that affect? If I take that pile of weeds out, what was living in that? I take that as more of my priority now than I do the food, because it just seems like when we put the food out now, it just grows in balance. And it feels like the field's got used to it as well. Like the weeds have changed. So we don't get the same weeds that were a problem in the beginning. Now we get weeds that grow far better with the system, and excuse the pun, but it just feels more natural in the way that we grow, in that natural farming model now, that it's not really much of a concern for us anymore.
And could you tell me, I want to understand, how does a grower get to this point of natural farming and looking at Syntropic, which we'll also explore, but how do you what kind of trajectory of learning and experiences have led you to working the way that you do now?
Yeah, so I started off in ornamental horticulture, and I was always more kind of like drawn to the wild gardens. And so we have people like Henk Gerritsen, who's a really famous wild designer. He designed a really beautiful garden in Waltham Place. We've got people like Derek Jarman at Prospect Cottage, Great Dixter, Ferg at Great Dixter. And so I was always drawn to more wild gardens. And I think that all horticulture and agriculture have something to learn from each other. I think that like mixed perennial wild gardening transitions beautifully into natural farming, just like regenerative agriculture can transition into ornamental gardening. And so I was always around that culture. And I did a lot with meadows. And like I said, I always loved biodiversity. And then one summer I got to work in Romania, and I took a copy of One Straw Revolution with me, Manasoba Fukuoka, and I read that book and it completely like light bulb in my head, something just clicked and I was like, this sounds amazing, and looking and researching that. And then I was very lucky to have the opportunity to work in Japan, and in Japan I spent my time working in gardens and meeting natural farmers and working on farms and meeting different people, and that's when I was introduced to an amazing natural farmer called Yoshikazu Karaguchi, and he took Manasobu's lessons and put them into a market garden sense. Because Manasobu is very extreme, like trees and just chuck seeds down and hope for the best. Does not work in a business model. Whereas Yoshikazu had that more business mind. And so working and chatting and researching, a pattern started to form that just seemed very obvious to me once it was like, this is how I should grow. And then I was lucky enough to get a position here, and I could take all those lessons and talks and ideas that I've had through the past like 12 years of doing this, and then put together a system that hopefully we could transition into a UK temperate climate, especially a North Devon climate, which is quite extreme. And really the 4 years has been taking all those lessons and trying to make it work, basically.
Am I right in thinking you started off in the RAF?
Yeah. So I actually started off in the military. So I joined up when I was 17, end of 17. I didn't want to go to uni. I hated school. And so I wanted to travel the world actually at that point. I had grandparents.
By planes.
Yeah. Romantic dreams of joining the military like your grandparents. And, I'm not part of that kind of like, laddie culture or anything like that. So the military was good and exciting. And I went to places like Afghanistan, and I served overseas, and I came back. And I just wanted to get away from it, even though, as amazing as seeing these countries were and meeting all the people abroad, there wasn't, I didn't like being there or why we were there. And so when I came back, I wanted to make sure that I could do something that was a benefit. And I grew up in a very rural village called Beckley in East Sussex. And, you know, I had beautiful childhoods of playing in woods and meadows. You know, I think it sounds ridiculous, you know, I'm only 35, but I really felt like my childhood is a massive contrast to what our ecosystems and nature is now. Like, I can remember bugs and insects and everything, and I go out into the fields now and they're dead silent. And so even in that kind of like, you know, 25, 28 year period, I've noticed a difference. And so I really wanted to make sure that I could do something that would, you know, almost protect my childhood in a kind of like romantic sense. And that's what led me down horticulture, and is what has led me here. And really, that idea is why I still do this today, to be honest.
And it probably matters even more to you now that you're a father.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think natural farming, you know, Manasobu actually puts it perfectly. You know, natural farming is more about the cultivation of the human than it is the crop. You know, and I really believe in that now. Like, working in a farming system like this and watching my guys and the team work in it, you can just see that there's a happiness, there's a joy, there's a passion. You know, they change while they're here. There's just a more open-mindedness to it all. You know, and especially since, you know, being a new dad, you know, I want my son Barney to have that connection to food. You know, and when I bring him on the farm and we go to pick vegetables together, you know, he'll pick the peas while I hold him up. And as he's picking peas, there's like a bird perched on top and there's insects flying at him. And he can rummage through the crops and there'll be different animals and everything living in that. You know, what a fantastic space for someone to grow up in, to have that exposure to everything. And I think it's really important to have that exposure, having your food with this host of different insects. You know, back to the slug. You know, whatever our opinions about slug, and I will say I hate slugs. Like, I'm not like a, you know, I'm pro slug to some degree, but I still like,
sure you don't have a slug.
Yeah, I'm not like
your bed.
Go slug. But I think there's something really nice, especially for a child like Barney, to be picking, and then there's a slug, and then there's a beetle, and then there's an earwig, and then there's this and that, and so on.
Parenting in a way.
And I think that's really good, and it also teaches, hopefully, him and anyone else involved in this not to be scared of slugs, not to be like, oh, I've got to eradicate it and get rid of it. Actually be like, oh yeah, that slug means that beetle has something to eat, and I think that's the bigger mindset that we have to have with all of this.
And one of the things that you're doing here is you're talking about planting particular trees, and you've planted particular trees that are going to take a lifetime to mature, like walnuts and oak. I mean, those are going to outlive you.
Yeah.
And so obviously, in order to commit to planting a tree like that, it shows that you have some kind of hope for the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Or is it out of desperation? Or
I think it's part and part, really. I think, you know, the kind of like cynical side of me, or you know, the kind of like, you know, the bloke holding the doomsday board on his chest outside the village centre. You know, I honestly believe that, give it 20, 30, 40, 50 years, will annual vegetable production be able to happen outside for our climate? You know, our seasons are shortening massively. I think everyone across the country's felt the pressure this year. We really don't have a spring. You know, who knows what our autumn's going to turn into. I just feel like annuals themselves are becoming harder and harder to grow. And I do think we're at a fork in the road now again, where do we invest more in polytunnels, fleece, netting, these in
southern Spain?
Yeah, southern Spain. Like, do we introduce all these plastics and, you know, wherever they come from to grow food, or do we look at perennials or oaks for flower instead, or walnut flower or nut flowers or trees? And so part of me is trying to create a farm that will be resilient for the future. Like, I want this farm in 100, 200, 300 years to be somewhat resilient to whatever our climate will be. And I think there is also a part of me that, yeah, maybe I'll see my first acorn, hopefully, fingers crossed, or maybe I won't. But we're also creating a habitat and a future for kids or the community or whatever happens to play under these kind of oak trees and everything. And I think that, you know, a dream of mine would be this 200-year-old oak tree that people are harvesting acorns from to make flour, but you can also climb this oak tree and learn about the history of the oak tree. I think it's such a, you know, really, really beautiful thing. So I think it's a bit of both, a bit of a fear of the future, whatever our climate will be, and food, and what our food growing will be in the future. And a bit of me is also actually creating a really beautiful space for biodiversity and community that will enjoy it, hopefully.
Now, in order for us to create a resilient food future and to essentially we would need to perennialize our diets in a way when it comes, which would actually require such a massive cultural shift. Now we know from history these kind of shifts in society and politics can happen very, very quickly. But one of the things that's quite interesting here is your connection with the kitchen and the chefs actually having to work with these weird and wonderful things that most people on the street have never come across. Could you just give us a bit of history about why this set up, why you kind of have been given this free reign, and kind of the relationship between the land here and the people staying in the pub in the village in the kitchen there?
So, the farm works for us because we grow for a pub, a fish shop, and a village shop. We are all part of the same project, which is the collective at Wolseley. My job and the farm is here to provide food for the pub and the fish shop and the shop, specifically. So for us, we can do the perennials, we can do the odd fruits and vegetables, because we know that the chefs will turn that into something and make that work. If we were a community-based project, I probably wouldn't focus so much on the perennials because I know they just won't sell from a business point of view. So we are lucky that we can do that because we grow for a restaurant. Growing for wholesale restaurants is another market, an idea where I think perennials have massive possibilities.
Why?
Because I think foraging is almost evolving into perennial food now. I think the trend
and that's trendy.
Yeah, so I think the trend of forage foods is actually turning more into perennial foods. And I do think there'll be a big shift in cooking to focus more on perennials. And so I think when we're selling to restaurants and these kind of high-end chefs or gastropubs or whatever, I think there will be a big perennial veg market. I really, feel it, and we talk to chefs and we know it's kind of coming maybe, especially with what's coming out of Europe, where food, forests and perennials are utilised a lot more than we use in the UK. It just feels like it's going that way. So, but if it was a community-based, definitely I wouldn't be focusing so much on perennials. My hope is that by selling more to chefs, as we know what happens, it trickles down and then that confidence happens more. And we have some ideas that we're going to do veg subscriptions to the community, and that will contain a recipe. And so we'll put certain perennials in there to get people used to it. And we're in quite a rural space as well. I mean, I put a kohlrabi and a lemon drop cucumber in the shop once. I thought I was going to be burnt on the stake on top of the hill for this obscurity.
It gets a lot of hate.
But I think that's really good, because I think it shows that actually we need to teach people about food and where it comes from, and show them an alternative as well.
I had kohlrabi the best way possible a couple of evenings ago at the Bull Inn in Totnes. Do you know what they did?
No.
Right, so they sliced kohlrabi and used it basically as a taco shell.
Oh, awesome!
And then they had pulled pork and stuff, and it's amazing burnt chili salsa.
Yeah.
But they used the kohlrabi as the taco shell, and I was genius. I think one of the things, and this is something that I really want to try and explore, is that kind of the world that we're in now. We're in a world where there's the celebrity chef.
Yeah.
And a lot of people chefs now are almost they are celebrities, and this is something that never used to happen, and the kind of influence that they have on people and home kitchens is massive.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that is needed in order to gradually transition towards a more perennialized diet is to try and appeal to these celebrity chefs or chefs that have a big voice and a big reach, to work with these produce to make it kind of more appealing for people. And I was chatting to Mandy Barber of Incredible Vegetables yesterday, and she said that one of the issues with perennial vegetables is that when you look at it at field scale, which is what they're trying to do at Riverfoot, is that there aren't the machines that are designed to do these perennial vegetables at a field scale. But I think that that's a huge opportunity for market gardeners, for people that have smaller scale, especially around the perimeters or around the margins, to grow these rarer crops that might not be commercially viable tractor scale, but it's something that can set them apart, and they can work hand in hand with transitioning towards a food system. Because at the moment, everyone's like with supermarkets, like, oh, it's impossible to compete against the supermarkets because they're just so convenient.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to compete against the supermarkets, you've got to create a food system which just makes the idea of a supermarket redundant.
Yeah.
We've got to stop fighting it. We just got to find something else, which is kind of a big thing. And what I'm quite excited about here, especially looking at, because I think a lot of people kind of they also romanticize, especially in my world and my sphere, like with syntropic agriculture, is that they're looking at certain cases like in New Zealand or Australia where growth is so quick.
Yeah.
And then you look at trying to grow a food forest here in the UK and the growth is slow, and it's like that's not going to do anything. However, the way that you've approached applying a kind of a temperate twist on syntropic here, I've actually been blown away. Can you just chat a bit about that and the system? Because that is maybe that kind of that faster rate of transition that we could explore to produce more of a diet here in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of the perennials and supermarkets, definitely agree. Like, we need, like, social media, whether we want to believe it or not, has a huge impact on our lives. And so we need the chefs and the influencers and the celebrity chefs to use these ingredients to trickle down. I think the problem in the future will be accessibility, because I think it's going to require huge investment from the market gardens. And it's, I mean, we've got Mandy, Backyard Larder, Workers as the free suppliers in the whole UK.
And with Badford, they want to do a field of perennial kale, which you can only like produce 100 at a time.
Exactly, and Mandy sells out within 5 hours.
I know, I'm literally there, like, I put it on my calendar, the shop next open.
And so I think that's an issue for the future as well. And whether, if it gets so popular, will there be enough to meet the market? I'm a big lover of market gardens, working in America, especially, where there's a market garden, almost you could chuck a stone, you'll land on one. And what market gardens play in a community, I think, is really important. So I think definitely from a market garden point of view, perennials fit perfectly. I think from a field scale, kind of hand harvesting, it works brilliant. And we have to remember, a lot of these perennial foods have more protein, more minerals. They fill us up. I think Apios americana, for example, has got like 80% protein content or something absolutely bonkers. So you have a few and you're full. What an amazing food in a world where food is so expensive and we have to eat so much because it doesn't fill us up anymore. So I think, from a market garden point of view, and getting that perennial food out there to get people cooking with it, to then inspire, kind of just normal community people to start cooking with it, is definitely something. And for us on the agroforestry side, we're 17 acres for our side. The farm's 180 overall, but we're 17 in that. I think we're about 14 acres agroforestry now, whether it's, what I term romantic food forest or agricultural food forest or syntropic. We kind of blend those three. And I'm a massive convert to syntropic now. To be honest, all our agroforestry now is syntropic based.
What is syntropic?
So syntropic is it's a form of agricultural farming that was developed by a chap called Ernest Gosch, who is a Swiss chap who moved to South America. He bought this old kind of like chocolate plantation,
as you do,
as you do, which was totally dead, totally destroyed because it was heavy chemicals and fertilizers. I think the name of the farm when he bought it was Land of No Water or something like that. And then through like observing nature and wild and everything, he developed an agroforestry form of syntropic agriculture, which is, to put it in a nutshell, is a competition system. So we're planting trees at very close density. It's also a heavily pruned system. So I think what a lot of people think is, you put the trees in, you leave it becomes overgrown and unmanaged and it's too big. It's not that. Most of syntropic is also the pruning of it in the spring. So we prune, 40 to 60% of a tree out every spring.
Is that like early spring or?
So it's kind of like end of spring, like mid-spring. So we call it like May,
So with the
end of April, May,
with the new vegetative,
with the new vegetative growth coming in, and so we'll take massive chunks of the trees out, prune it up the side. We'll prune it up high so it lets enough light in. This idea of like, oh, shading out doesn't really exist. Actually, what it is more protection. As the grower, we can dictate the shade, you know. So we could have a syntropic system and our brassicas next to it, and we could be like, right, we need a bit of shade to help these brassicas, because even though we're wet in the spring, we're also really hot in the summer now, and so we want that bit of shade. So we can direct how much shade we create, or we can take all the sides out and put it full sun again. So we prune it up high and we decide what our shade quantity is. All the biomass that we prune gets dropped on the ground. And so Syntropic is also a way that we can take really bad destroyed land and turn it back into a fertile farming system, because the trees and the biomass that we're producing from that is also building our fertility. So we don't have to bring compost in or anything. We're making the compost in situ, and we're using high density trees to prune out, drop material, but also to start to build those important like bacterial fungal connections that generate fertility. And it's a very diverse system, you know. Elder, willow, poplar, oak, cherry, apple, plum. You know, we put loads of different plants in.
What about annuals?
Yeah, so the first year, you know, it's kind of called like the placenta phase, and that's our protection phase. And so for the first year, where everything's quite small, we use more annuals. So for the first year, definitely. Maybe the second year, you can add things like kale, chard, potatoes and broad beans as a classic combination, because the potatoes cultivate. And I've noticed, especially on the farm, potatoes build huge beetle diversity. I think the cover and the dankness and the cultivation of the potato just invokes beetle wrath almost on the slug. And so you could say potatoes build beetles in that first stage. So beetles and broad beans. We also prune them as well. So the broad beans, like we do with taking out the tops, and this is what I find hilarious, like we get these scientific papers on syntropic and pruning, and then we realise our granddads and our granddads were almost doing this back in the day when we used to, like, you know, top our beans and everything. But we know by topping the beans, the plant thinks it's being grazed. It will send out different kind of like acids and messages into the ground, being like, oh, something's eating me. Let's bulk up a little bit more. And it's the same with the trees. By pruning the trees, the trees think it's under stress. That stress will make it put even more growth on. And when we read books like, you know, The Trees Will Talk and everything, we know those messages get carried through hyphae. And I've seen it firsthand. So when I prune the willow and it's sending those messages out, I know the apple and the plum and the elder next to it are getting the same messages, and they even put even more growth on as well. And so it's
so societal, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's really, you know, it's complicated, which I think in this world of efficiency, everything must be efficient and easy. It kind of gets pushed away. But
the thing with efficiency though is, like, it might be efficient in the short term, but the long term, it leads to all of these issues that with farming, it started off efficient, but we're now looking at the repercussions of that efficient system.
Yeah, you know, it's definite. You know, what we're doing is putting something in long term, and I think this word of complication and complicated in business, you know, has taken a bad rap. It's not complicated in the sense of managing it. It's just complicated in the way of comprehending it.
It's complex.
And it is. It's
It's complex,
yeah,
but it's not complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, we've seen massive success from it. You've seen it. The trees are 3 times bigger that are grown in syntropic compared to non-syntropic.
To be honest, I feel like seeing that is like the excitement that I have with this, what I can do with my land.
Yeah.
But also how other people can, like, the growth in that small space of time. If that doesn't give people hope and excitement, I don't know what would.
Well, exactly. And like we can say like we want to grow food forests. So I love food forests, and I do think they are a solution for the future. We just have to make them in an agricultural business sense. So if I plant my syntropic and syntropic is also about cuttings, sowing things from seed, which sounds ridiculous, you know, sow trees from seed, oh no, it'll be, you know, in the ground by the time it doesn't. I know firsthand, if you sow a tree from seed, it will catch up to the whip and the big tree within a few years and be stronger for it. And so what we do is
it's the same with vegetables, to be honest. Like, direct sowing, totally underrated. Everyone's like so keen on the module sowing, but like my dad, like tomatoes that just spring up from the ground in a polytunnel, I just leave a few back. I have like this insane cherry tomato tree that was a one thing that I let that was self-seeded.
They always catch up. So what we do is, so syntropic is you know, natural farming in itself. I find, you know, I first went into this like, oh, you know, it's a set of, it's more of like a philosophy in yourself. Like you kind of have to, it's your passion and your idea of what you want from natural farming that makes it work. And so for us, when we plant a Syntropic, we don't want to buy in Osmocote, pots, plastic. So 90% of it we do by cuttings. Fruit trees, we can't graft. We don't have the facility, so we do buy bare roots in for fruit trees. But nuts, fruit bushes, everything we do by cuttings, because it just minimizes that input. And they end up being stronger plants. And we're very windy here, so to be honest, cuttings work better for us. And so what we do is we do a lot of that, and then we also add things called tree nests. And so every meter within a Syntropic row will sow like 40 or 30 different tree species in a little nest by seed, and we'll let that grow as a little microforest, and we'll edit that to the things that have done well. So that seed nest could contain oak, birch, poplar, elder, Cornus mass, whatever, and we'll edit those trees as they get denser and denser, eventually ending up as just the oak tree. And we do that with fruit as well. We'll sow apple seeds, knowing that we'll only get 30% good ones out of that tasting, but we're happy to take those rests out and keep those 30%, but we get a lot better and stronger trees. So Syntropic is also about like minimizing your inputs, your plastic, trying to help the environment as much as possible as well. And when we grow a food forest, for example, if we do it as a Syntropic idea, so if we think, right, I want my food forest to look like this 20 years time, and so you put those trees in that you want to be there in 20 years, then the spaces in between, we can add the Syntropies, we can add the willows and the poplars, we could add raspberries for fruiting for the first 2 years. We start to get money in the first couple of years, and then we could turn that into another fruit that we can harvest, knowing that one day they'll all disappear because a forest will begin to develop. But we can use Syntropic to create a profit every single year by putting in different crop. So first year, potato and beans, brilliant. Second year, raspberries, brilliant. Third year, we may start to get things like elderflowers and berries. Year 10, we're starting to get our first nuts. And so we can add it, and eventually those willows and poplars will either be cut down, shaded out and gone, and we'll end up with the forest that we had our kind of like vision for 20 years prior. But it just frees you up a lot more, and from a business point of view, it allows you to have that agroforestry and habitat and natural farming, while also using it to generate some kind of income in the first few difficult years, basically, that it takes for the trees to get up.
What about though, because like the kind of the critical side of me thinking about it is like, okay, that's all like, it's great for like that 20, 50 year vision, like forests, etc. Is there any scope where you might actually, like, is that what you plan for this whole site? Because I'm also thinking, what about the annuals or the short-lived perennials? Like, are they just not going to exist on this kind of site in 50 years' time?
So another good thing with Syntropic, you can like any agroforestry, you can build it to what you want. And so what I want for the farm is basically almost like, apart from the track and the road, I want 100% tree cover across everything. What that opens up is the exciting possibility of coppicing as well, and like I said, that human intervention, us as the ecosystem, we've been coppicing for thousands of years as a species. I think coppicing is one of our oldest forms of agriculture, and so what we're starting to plan now in the produce field is that we're planting it all up as a Syntropic forest. It's going to be a mix between kind of agroforestry Syntropic, which is more service trees, so more trees for like windbreak habitat, not so much for eating, and then edible Syntropic rows, which are more like apple and whatever, but we'll focus those on more cob, chestnut. We're developing a system which was taught to us by a chap called Phil Corbett. So we're trying not graft, but we're trying to grow variety apple trees on their own rootstock, which means that if we can get them on their own rootstock, we can actually coppice those apples and have us in a coppice system. And so that's something we're trialing this year. What's even more exciting about that is you can actually propagate fruit trees from root cuttings, eliminating the need to graft, which we can't do. And so we're actually creating, in the produce field where a lot of our annuals grow and where our perennial vegetables will begin to transition into, we're actually going to have a Syntropic coppice rotation. And so I think we split it up into 5 zones. And so in the produce field, which is 1.5 acres, there'll be 5 different forms of agroforestry regeneration through a coppice system that's all based on Syntropic. So 1 year we'll cut the whole thing down. All that biomass will get turned into hugel beds. We'll reset the system. It's going to be loads of light coming in. So that will be herbs, beans, squash, anything that loves the sun. Next to that, there'll be another section which will have a start of a canopy forming because it's 5 years on from that one. That's where our lettuces will go to stop them bolting. Brassicas in the next one, and so on and so on and so on, basically. And what we think is going to be a 15-year coppice rotation. Year 10 to 15, that's where the deep shade perennials will live while we're harvesting nuts and berries. And so that could be hosta, Korean celery, Solomon seal, all these things that love deep shade as well. So we can definitely turn it into a coppice rotation. And I think that's what it should be. I think an agroforestry system should be a coppice rotation as well, because we know that the best fertility comes from forest regeneration, and that's what we do. So we don't buy compost, we don't use compost here, and so we rely on the weeds and the trees in the agroforestry to build our fertility for us.
And in terms of building the fertility, you also mentioned the role of comfrey in a temperate kind of food, in this temperate climate, trying to establish the biomass early on. Comfrey is one of the key parts of that, as well as weeds.
Yeah, so when we talk about Syntropic, people instantly think, it's a tropical system, which it is a lot in Australia, New Zealand, South America.
Should you rename what you're doing here?
Yeah, I guess I did.
Syntemperate.
Syntemperate, I think I like that. I may take that.
Yeah, that's yours. You can have it.
I'll take that.
I'll wait. It's worth it, because I think that's just...
Yeah.
When I first heard Syntropic, my initial reaction, even though I shouldn't be so judgmental, is there's the word tropic in it. I'm not going to take that seriously.
And I think because they get, you sneeze and a tree's grown about 4 meters, and so they
and they do like bananas.
Yeah, so like bananas is their biomass. So they harvest bananas and then chop them down because they're monocarpic, and chop them down and then drop them as mulch.
How'd the other half live?
So we can't do that, of course. So what we have to do is recognise that first 3-year tree establishment before the willows and the poplars, because willow and poplars are bananas in the system, basically. Eucalyptus as well is a really good one. So we have to recognise that it's going to take a couple of years for that to build enough biomass to start chopping and dropping it. And especially if we're doing it from cuttings as well. So what we do is we use comfrey. So potatoes, broad beans, we're getting a crop of that, but it's also generating a huge amount of biomass. And then comfrey is our perennial biomass. And so we think we've worked out that comfrey after 2 years can basically mulch about a 2 meter space. So every 2 meters we have one comfrey plant, and we use comfrey as our banana tree for the first couple of years before the willows and poplars start to put on enough growth that we can start chopping them and dropping them, basically. So definitely for a temperate environment, you need to think of a quick growing perennial biomass plant. You could even have grass next to it, and you just cut the grass every 6 weeks and use that grass mulch on your row. So you could even just simply grow grass, cut the grass and put it on. But you need to have some kind of biomass generation for those first few years before the trees start to produce enough that you can chop them.
But this is maybe the most challenging part for you.
Yeah.
Is the natural farming side of you doesn't want to cut that grass, because that grass is a habitat. And so what is your decision making framework when it comes to setting up and looking after it?
So I focus a lot on my career meadows and long grass. The term like English rainforest is true. Meadows and long grass habitats are some of the most biodiverse, especially when they're neighboured to a forest.
Meadows are called English?
Yeah, we call them like English rainforests because they just have so much biodiversity in them.
Wow.
They're one of the only few plagioclimaxes where we have a benefit on the land. Especially when you have them next to a forest, because they can take woodland end creatures and they can live in that, and they can also take grassland species to some degree and live in that, so you get a mix of woodland and grassland. So meadows attract moths, which then attract bats like to hunt in open ground, so it's that kind of idea. And so I don't like to use grass as a biomass builder because I don't like to cut it in the summer. Mice, voles, toads, we have foxes and fox cubs running through the long grass. So I choose to use comfrey because it naturally collapses down anyway. And so I'm not really doing too much of an intervention on that. But you can use grass, and again, it comes down to what you want from the system, really. And I also try to make sure that fossil fuels are minimal on the farm. I do have a dream that in the next 5 or how many years it takes, we won't use fossil fuels anymore, hopefully, touch wood. And so the idea of getting a mower out and cutting the grass to then put on, and I do think very complex. So I think, right, so I've got to get my BCS out, which we cut long grass with. I'm going to cut that. Okay, so in order for me to cut that grass, I've had to put something in the machine, which has probably come from the North Sea or the Middle East.
Sorry, would you mind?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
Carry on come from the North Sea or the Middle East. Yeah.
So I have to use a substance that's come from the North Sea or the Middle East to put into a mower to cut the grass. And to me, I just think that's bonkers to have something to come out of the ocean to cut the grass to then build biomass. So I choose not to do that, basically. I'd rather have something I can take a sickle. And the farm works off sickles. We sickle everything.
Sickle scale.
Just like a Japanese sickle. And so I just rather just chop it with a sickle and then drop it as a mulch. And that's generally how I prefer it.
Do you use a sickle more than a scythe? Or like, does it depend on scale?
Yeah, so the sickles, we wear the sickles out after one season. We have to the serration disappears and we turn them into blades instead. And so we do everything by sickle. We don't use hoes. The only tools we really use are sickles, secateurs and broad forks. That's about it, really. And I think the broad fork we use more because we like using it rather than actually needing it. There's something quite satisfying about using a broad fork. And so everything is run off sickle, basically. And so if we can create a biomass that we can just sickle, it works far better for us. And so that's kind of my choice in that, but again, it depends on what someone wants from it. If you're doing like 1,000 acres of Syntropic, then maybe grass works a lot better for you than chopping, Comfrey. So it kind of just depends on your system. And I am a big believer in make something that works for your system and your farm. Don't try and like take something and do it. Like make something that works for you and what you want to achieve in that as well.
I think that's quite an important thing with that people don't kind of understand with permaculture is that they see something like, oh, I'm going to do a herb spiral, or they're just kind of going to copy and paste certain things without actually taking into account what are their resources, what are their actual needs, and what are their actual goals. I think for some things it's nice to have that inspiration, but it's kind of about adapting it. But I think the thing that stops a lot of people is that they're worried about making a mistake.
Yeah.
And so for you, this is, if I understand correctly, this is all kind of a new place for you to experiment with.
Yeah.
That you're using things that you've never done before.
Yeah.
But now, kind of like 4 years on, the only way you've got to this stage is by making mistakes. Am I right? Or
yeah. So, like I said, we were lucky that from day one we wanted this, and we factored that financially on the farm. Like we knew that the first 2 years was going to be hard. Like we knew it, and so from a budget point of view and a financial point of view, we factored that economic loss, and we knew we had to. So for the first 2 years, we knew that things were going to get lost. And like I said, we grew things that did well, and we didn't try to grow things that didn't do well. And that's how we built the farm, basically. Year 3 and 4 has just been success after success, and we've diversified our food production a lot more now because we can. I think this, we've gone through massive mistakes on the farm. We've done ridiculous things that have not worked. And I think it's really important if you're starting this from scratch, give yourself a year to think about it. Like fallow the field if you can, fallow it, cover crop it, let it build, and just spend a year trialing and testing and giving it a go. Because that's kind of what we did before we got confident enough to really make a go for it. People would be like, oh, it'll get better, and Japanese farmers be like, it'll get better, and I was like, oh, shut up, it won't. It does get better, to be fair. It does. Like, once you set those parameters in and you stay true to them, that's the hardest thing. And I've done it. I've gone in the field and I'm like, oh my God, the slugs have eaten everything. I'm going to put pellets down. And it's taken a lot of willpower to be like, no, because once I go down that road, it's very hard for me to come back from it. And so we've financially taken a hit on those crops and done something else. I will say this, and I put hand on heart, this is the truth. Generally, it always works out. It always works out. And a really important lesson I learned, which again, I kind of ignorantly kind of shrugged off, was, from Japan, they always say observation over reaction. We live in such a reactive world that the minute something bad happens, we want to do something because I think it makes us feel good and we're trying to solve the problem. Actually, generally 9 times out of 10, the problems get solved by observing it first.
I think that's a metaphor for life.
Yeah, and it is, from a business point of view, I sound bonkers, but it does work, and it is a really good idea to have. And perfect example of this. So year 2 we started. First year was a struggle, because we had to plant food forest and plan and everything while trying to grow produce. We grew the produce. I always remember the second year, it was like, right, cool, we're going to do this. Second year, it was like mid-May, I think it was. And I sent the text out to the groups. We have like a group channel. I said, field looks amazing, brilliant, it's working, fantastic. I kid you not, the next day, I got a phone call in the morning from one of my growers going, I don't know what's happening, but something bad's happened. And I was like, okay. I came down, and I've never heard of this pest, but we had turnip sawfly. Apparently it's a really rare pest.
Never heard of it either.
Doesn't happen. Nearly wiped us out as a society in the 16th century when we had Charles the Turnip King, because they ate all the turnips.
That's basically the only native British vegetable.
Yeah. And 17th century, they nearly wiped it out. It was that bad. So all my friends had never heard of it. And I kid you not, it looked like one of the is it 7 plagues? It looked biblical. The field was black. And it wasn't thousands, it was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these.
What, just?
Yep, sawfly, and they ate every brassica in the field, and they stripped everything back. Everything. And it gone from a beautiful looking farm to skeletons everywhere. And for us, how our climate is, leafy greens, salads are our bread and butter. We grow amazing leafy green salads, beetroots and everything, because we don't have the light levels or the harshness, and we're quite wet, so we grow. And they ate every brassica in the field. Mustard, everything. And it was, really put me into a depression, actually. I think I had to go home and get a hug from my mum. But observation over reaction, me and Russell were like, right, let's kill them all. And it's like, well, no, let's stick to philosophy what it is. Again, it sounds ridiculous. Natural farming, a pest isn't a pest. It's not a problem. There's some reason to it, or it's going to add a benefit. So we took a step back. We reassessed the damage like anyone does when they lose a crop. And I mean, everything. I remember in gardening, because sawfly is quite bad. Solomon seal sawfly is a common pest in gardening.
Or gooseberry.
Yeah, gooseberry. What we used to do was brush the plants every morning.
Right.
And by brushing the plants, the sawfly would naturally fall off, and then the beetles gobble them up. Beetles again. Gobble them up on the ground. And so that's what we started to do. We started to brush everything. So we brushed all the plants.
By Beetles or something.
Yeah, I know. It should be ground beetle. So we brushed the plants every day to get them down. Then we started to actually crush the dead plants down to the ground. And we were trying to get the sawfly all on the ground. What's even more terrifying about turnip sawfly, it actually has 5 life cycles in 1 year. So once you get the sawfly, it buries itself in, pupates into a fly, lays its next eggs, the sawfly comes back and it does that. And once you get it in the ground, it's in there forever. So I was like, right, okie dokie. So I was willing to become a pumpkin farmer from now on. But anyway, so massive panic stations at this point. And the more I read about it, the more I started to panic. But anyway, we were observing. So we brushed the plants, we collapsed everything down. And then all of a sudden, a massive flock of finches, I mean, a murmuration of finches dropped down to us. And the finches were just destroying the sawfly. I mean, the field was covered in them, like you get in a farmer's field, a seed field. And all these finches were everywhere. They were in the agroforestry. The stems that we left, they were perching on, and they were just pecking them. A couple of days later, I think they got like a 12-day before they dropped back into the ground. They were noticeably gone. They were just disappearing. Kales were starting to come back a little bit, and we were like, right, okay, they're disappearing and everything. And then one day, it almost like they're gone, and we kind of thought, right, they're buried in the ground. Let's get ready for the next hit. So we waited. Nothing happened. Waited. Nothing happened. And I think we got to about September, October, and me and Russell found enough to put on our hand, about 5 on our hand. Ever since then, so that was 2 years ago, we've never had a problem with turnip sawfly again. Now, not knowing, because I'm not a biologist or an ecologist, but from my observation, what happened was the field reacted, nature reacted, and whenever there's a pest bloom, let's say, or, let's not, pest is unfair, let's say an anomaly, when this was an anomaly, nature always reacts. It's like a rash or us, like we get a fever, and more finches, beetles, centipedes, everything just, I think, descended and ate them like a massive buffet. And we've never had them again. And they were supposed to be a perennial problem for us from now on. And we've never had one. And from that 2 years, we've gone 2.5 years now, never having to protect anything, no netting, no nothing, no fleece. And we've never had that problem again. Now, was that the ecosystem reacting to it because it's so wild out there? I don't know. Or, were we lucky? But we've never had that problem again.
Amazing. I'm just as a little pause for a second. How are you finding this?
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
You're right for another 10.
Yeah, keep going
10,
as long as you want. Yeah, that's fine.
No, this is I'm having so much fun.
Yeah, no, keep going.
Cool. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, or just now, is about how we grow leafy things really well.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me in Wales, two things grow really well. It is trees, usually willow, and grass. And so I'm thinking about a food system. What is the most sustainable food system? It is actually a tree and grass based food system. But one of the things that I hear very often, especially with trees, and I'm sure we've all heard it, is, oh, you can't eat trees. And then you'll be like, oh yeah, what about an apple tree? Right, yeah, well that's a fruit, etc. One of the things I was quite excited to hear is how you're actually planting, like how much you're doing with perennial salads, but you're growing things like limes and white mulberries and Chardonnay. Great. Yeah. Can you chat a little bit more about that and why?
Yeah, so, with how our climate's going, it's getting more difficult to grow, especially in those early seasons like March, April, May. Start of May are bonkers now. And what we've noticed is the things that do really well are the trees. Don't get touched by slugs, don't get hit by anything, grow in the wind, can grow everywhere. And we've taken the decision now to focus more on perennial foods in general, but especially perennial salads. So we developed 2 beautiful perennial salads this year that have been really successful, and it's kind of given us the confidence to be like, actually, this does work. You can actually produce a salad without having to use lettuce and rocket. Delicious salads as well, may I add.
It is important.
Yeah.
If you want people to change, you have to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think perennials fit into that ever so slight foraging remit sometimes. My uncle
leaves off a tree.
Yeah, my uncle says it perfectly. He thinks that foragers are like wine connoisseurs, and they'll give you something to try and it tastes absolutely disgusting, but they'll tell you it's the best tasting thing in the world. And I think perennials can sit within that sphere slightly. There are a lot of horribly tasting perennials, just like there's a lot of delicious tasting perennials. And so we've spent a long time developing salads with things that taste good, that are efficient to pick, that have a business point of view, they're not finicky and hard. And so for us, what came out on tops was lime leaf, just tilia leaf, and white mulberry leaf, which are beautiful, delicious lettuce alternatives. I think me and Jack were joking, we wanted to create I don't know if hashtags are still a thing, but we wanted to create a hashtag that was limes over lettuce, because they were delicious. And I think I put it into context when I was pricing it out. So I can buy a lime whip for £1.80. A seed packet, a lettuce packet is £2.25 for a small packet. Give it 2 years, that lime tree will produce more leaves than that salad packet. Give it 4 years, and that one lime tree will produce more lettuce than one salad bed. And from a cost point of view as well, it just makes more sense. But they are delicious. Lime leaves, white mulberry. And we can go beyond that. So once we let the white mulberry shoot a little bit, we can actually use white mulberry shoots as a vegetable substitute. And there's another sub-canopy tree, which we call Staphylia pinnata, which usually gets celebrated for its pistachio-tasting nut or seed. But actually, you can use the young shoot as a vegetable as well. So you can just cut the young shoots and saute them a little bit, and then you've got another vegetable alternative. So we can actually use trees as vegetables as well.
What's that one you just mentioned?
A Staphylia pinnata, bladder nut.
Bladder nuts.
And so we can use those crops. Saltbush, a very classic perennial, beautiful in salads, lovely salty. Texture's we have to recreate the texture of a salad, and we do that by adding things like the buckthorn plantain, the hylotiliphiums, the sedums, and the salt bushes, and they'll add the texture to the lime trees and the white mulberries that people are looking for, that crunch. But you've got 5 species as opposed to 1, doing the same thing. And we know that, I can't remember the 5th one, but we know that there's the 5 most nutritional crops that we can grow in the north, kind of our temperate climate, is vine leaf, mulberry leaf, lime leaf, and goji berry leaf. I can't remember the 5th one. And those 4 crops are the most nutritionally and mineral dense foods that we can grow in our northern hemisphere.
Are you serious about goji berry leaf?
Yeah, goji berry leaf. And we use goji berry leaf.
Because the thing is, I've been trying to grow goji berries for a few years, and it leaves up great.
Yeah.
But I've never had a berry set.
Goji berry leaf is delicious in a salad. Just a few trickled in. It has this lovely kind of like tangy bitterness. And remember, we grow for chefs, so they want, I can't remember what the 5 pillars of food are, but one of them is bitter. They want bitter, sweet, zest, stuff.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned is actually we're so scared of bitter. We're so terrified of it. It's so good for you. It's like one of the best things you can eat for your gut. is bitter foods. And so just adding a few of those goji berry leaves and just to add a little hint of bitterness that has this kind of zesty heat twist to it is really good. So goji berry leaf is a fantastic salad crop as well. And from in a world where we're living, where our food is so nutritionally poor, to grow those foods that are climate resilient, build biodiversity, require minimal input, nothing almost basically, and you're growing something which is dense and fills you up quicker, is a win on all parts really.
I'd like to explore the like minimal or no input side more, because one of the biggest barriers to people who want to, like, I think now, I think food forests are slightly over romanticized here in the UK for certain reasons. The other one is market gardens. I think people have this dream of having this lovely field and it's all like neat, and then they look at, I need to bring in so much fertility. And where I am, the closest place to get compost or municipal compost is about an hour and a half away by a lorry. Or I'm having to use manure, but for the manure, it's really hard because basically all of the farmers need it for their fields. Or you've got issues like aminopyralids when it comes to horses. So in a sense, it's like, want to start a market garden, but where do you get that fertility? And to me, it's like, why would you, similar to what you're saying about extracting the oil just to go and cut the grass, it's a similar thing of moving fertility from an external source. And so one of the things with perennials is you don't need the compost site. And again, like with the salad, and I love that what you were saying about the lime leaves in place of like replacing lettuce. Like to grow lettuce, you've got all sorts of issues like bolting, and you're going to have to like look at all of the kind of flipping the beds and all of these particular things, versus growing a lime tree that just comes back year after year. How much has the last 4 years shifted your thinking in terms of inputs, and what are the kind of like bare minimal inputs that you put here?
I mean, for me, sustainability, let's say, and that's kind of a buzzword that's died now, but it was a massive buzzword a few years ago.
Regenerative's
the new one now. Natural farming seems to be the new one now, even though I think there's a big blur to what natural farming is. But anyway, sustainability is the ability to sustain yourself. Like that is what true sustainability is. And I am quite blunt on this, and that's only because I think by not being blunt, it kind of like blurs the edges. But I do not believe in municipal compost. I think if we did microplastic test on that, it would terrify the nation. I cannot control what goes into that. And I know from firsthand, because I've gone down to see the factories, you're getting like packs of bacon, you're getting meat, you're getting all of this. That bacon, I have no idea where that came from. I have no idea how that pig got fed. I have no idea how it got treated. I mean, here in Torridge, they've actually lifted the processing. They've made it a lot easier. So basically, bin bags go into the municipal compost making now. They just heat it up so much it would just melt everything. So
delicious.
So that should be out the window now. To be honest, gone. You're right. You've got to bring it on a lorry where that fuel come from and everything like that. And I do think this obsession that we have with like composting everything, we have to remember that I totally agree and see the ease and the efficiency it creates, definitely, but we are also suppressing the landscape by doing that. I think we're one of the only countries that uses compost like that. Like when I worked in America, compost was not a suppressant. It's such a prized material. It was an inoculant. You sprinkled it everywhere. You didn't put like 6 inches of it on a bed to stop the weeds coming up. And seeing all those things, and I have the same idea with things like spring fleeces, which are made from microplastics that break down and you have to rebuy it. And if I have, I am, and you have to remember, I'm really complex about this is how I think about natural farming. Same reason I don't agree with slug pellets, organic or whatever. I mean, we can't use the formaldehyde ones anymore, but to kill the slug to grow a vegetable, I have to buy something which has flown in from somewhere, that's been made in a lab somewhere by someone that I have no idea who's done it. And I do not agree with this idea that we have that anything we bring on the farm, it resets the carbon clock at the gate and we're going to use it for good. And I think we have to take responsibility for whatever we bring on our land we have to factor in where it's come from, how long it's going to last, and so on. And so when we started this, we didn't want any of that. And so what we had to do was, right, so we're not going to compost thick, so we're going to get a lot of weeds. How are we going to labour that into the overall farm? Natural farming uses weeds to build fertility. So all our fertility comes from diverse root structures and polycultures that we grow on the farm. And a lot of the polycultures are basically weeds that we allow to grow on the farm. So we let the docks go nice and deep root. We let them sit over winter. The nettles sit over winter. They build fertility for us. And then things like the sow thistles, the persicarias, we grow them in balance with our crops, and they are building fertility. We have like 25 species polyculture veg beds because we have weeds, and we try to get 5 different veg families in one bed at one time. And I am a massive believer in polyculture. Like, you know, polyculture gets a bad rap for efficiency. You know, no way. We've developed efficient polyculture systems that haven't affected our pick in any way, shape, or form. Probably actually streamlined our picks more than anything. So like salad is a perfect example. We don't have beds of lettuce. We actually create the salad in one bed. And so the guys would pick one salad out of the bed. So it'll have, you know, so let's say I have the lettuce, the rocket, the herb, the plantain, the whatever, and they'll pick the salad mixed in the field and then bring it back. And I think all of these different factors, and we do things like IMO, and we do hay the beds, and we chop and drop everything. That's what builds our fertility. And we have never had a fertility problem on the farm, not once. I've never looked at a squash and been like, well, that's really hungry, we've got to do something about this. We've never had any fertility, and this farm hasn't had compost for coming up to 5 years now.
And the other thing that's quite nice about that is that it probably liberates you from feeling like you have to follow strict crop rotation. Yeah.
So we don't. So yes, we don't. I mean, we crop rotate by polycultures. Okay. The only thing we do rotate, because we can't grow in polyculture, is potato. And we have really acidic soil here, so we can grow new potatoes, let them go a bit bigger, they start to get scab. So we rotate the potatoes out just because of that.
Do you think over time the way that you're building the soil naturally is going to create more of an equilibrium with the pH levels?
I think so. I think it'll build up. I mean, it's getting better each year. My hope is that I'll get rid of potatoes completely and I'll just grow Apios americana and see if I can replace potatoes with a perennial alternative. Who knows?
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's a big gamble. That's my dream.
I look forward to all like the structures and stuff.
Yeah. So the farm is going to have a lot of like structures to grow up, and I think vertical growing is really important as well. But what I'm noticing is by growing in polyculture and allowing the weeds to have a place, the fertility just manages itself. The soil is in a constant tilth. Like, we never have to tilth the soil or anything. It just seems to always be in a tilth. Once we clear and stuff, you can just sow straight into it straight away. And I mean, that's just how we've kind of developed it and how we've built the system around it. And we have built the farm around that idea. Like I said at the start, we knew we were going to get weeds, because we knew that we weren't going to compost. And so natural farming, fortunately, celebrates weeds. You know, weeds pollinate as well. We eat them. I think 40% of the farm is the weeds that we pick as well. Like water pepper, which is a persicaria. We add that to our salads instead of chili. Stinger nettle is a massive crop for us. But because foraging wastes a lot of time and money looking for it, because we grow the weeds with our vegetables, we've actually made the foraging side of the farm even more efficient. So these crops that generate huge amounts of income because they're foraged, we actually just grow with our vegetables now. We just pick them all together.
Don't tell too.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, and so actually we've made a cash crop business out of the weeds as well, just as much.
That's amazing. This to me is it's like, I'd say in the UK, and looking at vegetable production, probably the sexiest thing is no dig, compost, and lots of compost and lots of input, and no weeds and clean and all of that. Now, no dig, the benefit about that is soil structure. But in terms of trying to, what's your opinion?
So I'm a massive fan of no dig, and the farm is no dig to a certain degree. I think when we start to look at the ecology, digging isn't a bad thing. When we try to do farming for ecology, like proper agroecology, we have to have a mosaic of different habitats. And so some beds need to be covered, some beds need to have growth, some beds need to be dug, and some beds need to be bare soil, because by creating a mosaic of different things, you're creating far greater biodiversity. The thing, digging resets an ecological system. Like, we have to remember that. So take the food growing out for a second. Like, the act of digging and cultivation is like adding fuel to the fire for an ecosystem. Like, if you chuck petrol on a fire, it goes like that. That's what digging does to an ecosystem. And so you want a little bit of that. I'm definitely not saying let's go back down to the world of double digging and rotavating. In no way sense.
Yeah, it's time for that.
Yeah, exactly. So like, we see the potatoes as our cultivation beds. So when we harvest the potatoes, we leave those beds bare until the garlic. So we leave them bare for about 4 to 5 months because loads of weeds come up and seeds come in, and the bare soil itself, like we find like snakes sunbathing.
It's the first stage of succession, and that first stage of succession also supports a certain group of insects that actually need that.
Yeah, and I think it's monoculture in the sense of everything the same. So, you know, I really thought about this last year actually, that if every single veg bed in our field looked like our kind of like perfect natural farming idea, we'd end up with a monoculture again of biodiversity. But by allowing the farm to be majority of that, with some bare earth and some digging here and there and whatever, you're actually creating far more biodiversity. Like, beetles love the bare ground, snakes love to sunbathe on the bare ground. Like, we want them in the field. Like, that's what we want. And I always say, like, you have to celebrate every last inch of ground and have something use that space. I don't really like the idea of like, right, here's my veg field, I've given you that hedgerow and forest, you live over there, I'll have this, let's have this understanding. I don't really like that idea because
it's segregated.
Land is disappearing so quickly. You know, we're surrounded by very conventional, I mean, look, there's a buzzard up there on the pole there, but we're surrounded by very conventional dairy farming here. All this is for slurry, you know, and you know, that's happening more and more in the country. So we really, as growers, have to celebrate give them every last millimetre of space that you can. Don't push them out. Don't see them as an enemy. And that includes the weeds and everything, and the sawfly to some degree. And that's kind of really the direction we're taking it now. But yeah, definitely, we are no dig, like we are. But I don't think we should be scared of digging. I think like what NEP is doing, you know, and Charlie, you know, and there's another really, really good forager gardener called Michael Watcher at Dickster. You know, we are who we are in the landscape. We need to celebrate that. But if you want to put it into layman's terms, I guess we're like the pig, and our cultivation and ripping and you know, hacking and slashing is what generates biodiversity as us on the ecosystem. You know, it's really good that robins used to follow the wild boar. Now robins follow us. You know, everyone thinks it's really cute, but the robin's following us because it thinks we're a pig, because it knows it's going to get food from us, when they used to follow wild boar before they've all, you know, kind of disappeared.
Not exactly their greatest compliment.
No, exactly. So I think again, it's just a balance, a mix, everything in balance and moderation, really.
Do you think like sometimes people just get too caught up in one method?
I think so. I think, you know, and we can do it as well. Like I said, we can make the whole farm the same. And you know, I don't like bare earth. Like, there's something about me that I just don't like, and I've gone to lessons and teachings and learned from people, never have bare earth, it's the worst thing you can do, you know. But from what I'm watching is you won't see as many birds on all the other beds except the ones that are bare earth, because they're picking all the worms out. But I think we just as humans, you know, and I'm guilty for this as well, like, we become fanatic about an idea that we have, and we just want that to be the best it can, and then we just apply that across everything. And it sounds ridiculous, you know, and the way my brain works is a little bit ridiculous, but I really think we have to think like, right, I want wood chip paths. Okay, great. Why? Oh, builds fungi, it's neat. Yeah, fantastic, agree with that. But what tree did you fail to do that? Again, was that electric, petrol? You know, again, did we take something out of somewhere in the ocean to make that wood chip to do that path? Why can't we just use weeds and chop and drop or living pathways instead? You know, and I think that's the way we kind of have to think. We really have to break it down to almost like the atom level and decide. And a bit of that is like, you know, you just got to get on with the job and do it, which we do as well. You know, we're not perfect in any shape or form. But I will say that, actually back to a previous comment, I think the biggest enemy to natural farming is, especially if it's not your land, is finding someone who will let you do it. You know, I've struggled to find anywhere that would let me farm this way. Because the minute you talk about growing with weeds, and the minute you talk about basically making deliberate mess, people are like, no way. And actually, the biggest struggle that agroecology has is that if you're having to rent that land or work for someone, is trying to find somewhere that will let you do it. It's kind of, I don't know, I just find it quite funny. Actually, the biggest enemy to that is trying to tell people actually this is the way we should grow or could grow.
But this is a thing that you see at the start of any kind of shift or revolution. It's the snowball effect. It's like really small, and then basically they need to create a tipping point where it then just becomes the norm. But at the moment it just feels a little bit too out there. And I think that's maybe. Do you ever think much about like your reputation, or do you ever hear about people just actually not like respecting or believing in what you do? Do you feel like, especially this last year and the amazing successes that you're experiencing, do you feel like you had Gardeners World here even? Do you feel that they're starting to take a bit more notice, or do you feel that they're starting to take you a little bit more seriously, or do you still feel that they're just too cut off and like, you know,
I think
head in the sand?
I don't know. It feels like to me this year, the idea of natural farming's really taken off. I don't know. I feel a shift in the industry. I really feel like this idea of like, oh, actually, you know, maybe we don't need to use compost, and maybe we can allow weeds, and maybe we can add more agroforestry or diversify our syntropic systems even more, or whatever. There's definitely a lot more interest. I think when we started out, people said never going to work. It's always that classic thing, and I think it's something.
Do you think that's jealousy?
I don't think it's so working in America. When you work in America, it's like, do it, let's go, let's do it. Great idea, let's do it. They'll tear it to pieces if it doesn't work, which I think is good sometimes. But it's very much like, let's do it. Got an idea, let's do it, let's try it.
But Britain,
there's something about British culture. We're very cynical,
reserved.
Yeah, and I think you know,
have you seen what he's doing next door?
Yeah, and we like
see it on the allotments.
Yeah, allotments is a perfect example. Parish councils are a perfect example. You know, and I think we're quite cynical people, and I will say that I think the most damaging phrase in our society in Britain is "it's the way it's always been done." I hate that phrase. It actually makes it like nails on a chalkboard when someone says it to me, and that's just the mentality that we have. Why that is, I don't know. And so like my American friends are like, yeah, cool, brilliant, let's do, you know, this looks amazing. But I will say there's a massive shift now, and I think it's come out of necessity. Compost is going up again this year. It's like £50 a tonne now. It's absolutely bonkers.
It's more than that for a lot of people.
It's crazy. Yeah, that's municipal wholesale. You know, wood chip has gone up to £45 a tonne. Wood chip used to be a free thing, and I think we still live in that world where wood chip was like just given to you. It's not given to you anymore. It's just as much as compost because they've seen a value in it. And because these things are exponentially going up, and because market gardens aren't making money anymore because input costs are so expensive, I'm definitely noticing more people are like, actually, you know, how do you keep your inputs so low? And there's a lot more interest in it now because I think it is, and I think people are recognizing that we're doing all this good, you know, whether we're organic or regenerative or whatever, it's still not helping the biodiversity problem. That is just rapidly crumbling around us. And I think also more people are seeing note that actually if I have an acre or 2 acres, I need to make that 2 acres really help the ecosystem as much as possible. And so I think there's a lot more positivity, back to your question. I think a massive positivity. I think Gardeners World was really good for us as well. And I think for 4.5 years now of it working, you know, each year someone goes, that won't work. Oh, let's see what it's like in the long term. You know, Monty Don gave us a good little kidney dig at the end of his program from our thing. And I like that, to be honest, because what we're proving is actually every year is getting better. And I think now we have the framework, we know what we're doing, we're a lot more comfortable, and we have proof in the pudding almost, that each year it's just proving more and more that actually this is an alternative if people wanted to do this. And I will say that there are people who have already done this to a similar sense, like Hilltown Organics down in Oakhampton. Martin and Sarah are my inspiration. You know, I love them to pieces. And they were a massive cushion when we first started this, because even I thought, oh my god, this is going to work. I have no idea. But people like Martin and Sarah and that have proved that actually, yeah, it does work, and they can be more extreme than us sometimes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think one thing, just to back the British way, I think one thing that is good about Britain is playing devil's advocate, and actually using that to help with making decisions for resilience. So instead of becoming complacent and thinking like, oh, wood chip's always a free thing, it's actually saying, oh, but what if it isn't? And it's always like questioning that thing.
And I'm not anti-British. I'm not anti.
Oh no, I know that.
I love Britain, and I love to be British, but I think what our credit is we are the stiff upper lip. We persevere. We don't give up. And I think someone always told me that Britain's a pirate of an island of pirates, and I do somewhat agree with that. I think we are quite we also like to stick it to the man almost as well. I think, even though we can be quite cynical, I can be quite cynical at times, and so I guess it's a blend in between two. And like Japan, where they won't say anything negative about you, and everything has a philosophical idea where it can give you a real beautiful mindset, but you could do something that doesn't work at all, but you're being told it's beautiful. So I think a cross between them all has worked really well.
Diversity, polyculture.
Well, exactly, polyculture in that, and for us especially, back to the British thing, which makes me laugh, is we have we have a good sense of humour as British people, which I quite like. And so even if it does go absolutely awful, we always make a joke about it and laugh about it and think of another way. And so it's, learning and meeting all these people has kind of led to that. So I love testing new ideas, whether we can afford to or we have time to, we always try to. That's the thing. So we're creating a brand new Syntropic forest. It'll be the first of its kind in the UK, hopefully. And because we want to persevere with that and do that, so that's that kind of American, let's do it, let's go for it, and then the British side to it is right, okay, let's come back down to earth a little bit now, let's kind of let's kind of criticize it a little bit here, and we'll do that and joke and laugh about that. And then the Japanese side is, let's also make it as beautiful as possible and enjoy the experience as well. We can do all these things and not enjoy it, and I think that mindfulness is a really important part of natural farming.
Have you just philosophized it like a new trinity of philosophy?
Yeah, maybe.
British, American, and Japanese way of life.
Yeah, because that's what that's the kind of crossing that you need. But I think all of those things have had a big impact. And I say daily that Japan inspires me to this day. Every day Japan inspires me in some way. I think back to how it was.
It's inspiring you here, and it seems to be inspiring in ways in restaurants as well. There's something to take back.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really going back to the American thing. You've got people like Mark Shepard out there, restorative agriculture, who is very open about annuals being the destruction of the world, linking it to every civilization that ended was an annual agriculture. So I think that's what I mean. That's kind of the American, and I think that's a really inspiring thing for me as well, to see that, and like I said, putting all those things together. Putting all those things together has kind of directed the farm, and still does to this day, to be honest. And as we get more comfortable with natural farming, we're a lot more chill about it, and that kind of chillness, just makes the guys feel a lot better, and it's almost natural to us now that we can just go out there and do it, to be honest. And I think that's really important as well. I think that allowing, whether you employ people, you're an employer, or you're employed, or it's you, whatever, being part of the farm, being part of the wallpaper, is a really important part of natural farming. Natural farming, is about food, and we're a business and whatever, but a main component of it is making sure that us, the grower, the human in the system, is part of that, and we can feel the beauty and mindfulness in that. And it does. Observation over reaction, that observation really opens your mind to what's happening, and the guys that work here are incredible. They come here not really knowing what to do, and by the end they're watching, observing and looking, and they just become part of it. It becomes second nature to you.
Brilliant. That was just a slight pause. Is there anything else you'd really want to chat or cover? Hopefully it's been quite a nice rounded.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we talk a bit about the perennial veg with Mandy, and then we'll talk about that just quickly about.
Yeah. Shall I just ask you,
you could say, I don't know, we're trying to replace a lot of the annuals with perennials.
Yeah. One of the things that I've realised over the years is that almost every single annual out there is a perennial version, and so especially like with vegetables. And so, what kind of how are you looking and trying to find these particular perennial versions of popular annuals? Because it's probably, like I said to Mandy, that I honestly think that perennial kale is like a gateway drug into people getting excited about perennial vegetables.
Yeah, so what we found is, even though we believe in natural farming and, you know, we're trying to build ecosystems, one thing we can't control is the weather. Like we can buffer it a bit with agroforestry and so on, but whatever way our climate's going, we cannot control. We know we're going to get wetter. We know we're going to get colder. You know, this summer we didn't even really have heat. I think we had about a week of heat here, and maybe this week as well. So this idea that hot summers and cold winters has kind of gone out the window. And so we can't control that. And, you know, like I've said previously, I think the idea of annual growing as the way we're doing it now is really up to question what that will be in the next 20, 30 years. Maybe we'll go the extreme, we'll be growing chili peppers and tomatoes more outside or whatever happens.
I won't complain.
But what I've noticed personally in talking to friends and other farms, it's getting harder and harder to grow annuals at a business point of view. And, you know, beetles and slugs aside, one thing I will say is that it takes a certain temperature for the beetle to wake up in the spring, whereas the slug can persevere through the winter. So if we keep getting these wet, cold, wintry springs, the beetles won't wake up, and then the slugs will still be a pressure on the field. So for me, to keep the natural farming model alive and keep going, I have to find alternatives, and to me the alternatives are perennials. You know, we've proven almost to ourselves here on the farm that the perennials are offering us that polytunnel buffer that we don't have. Like, we can pick a lot sooner from like March onwards and so on. And so for us, it just seems natural that we want to switch to a more perennial. And I think our natural farming is going to evolve into a heavy agroforestry, syntropic, perennial veg system with annuals dotted here and there. You know, we're never going to replace bean or peas or squash, and we don't want to. You know, we're still going to grow the annuals that we want to grow, but we're going to have a backbone that's built on perennials. So can we swap potatoes for apios? Can we swap our annual kales for perennial kales? Can we create perennial salads instead of annual salads? These things are far more resilient to the weather and how it will change, and will help build and protect biodiversity, because that's the other point of view, that we can still grow annuals, but at what cost to our biodiversity? And so it just feels natural. So we are going to be working with Mandy at Incredible Vegetables, and we're going to try and put the perennials at a market garden field scale for us, and see with our chefs if we can actually make it work. Like we talked about again before, we have to tiptoe about what tastes nice and what doesn't taste nice. But I think there's a really exciting future of perennial plant breeding. Now we want more perennials, and the market wants more perennials, and nurseries as well. I think, you know, again, in the next 20, 30 years, we could have perennials that rival annuals in flavour and taste, because we'll be able to breed them instead.
Do you know anyone who's doing that kind of work?
I think Mandy's the only person who's probably giving it a go at the minute. But like I said, the market's there, and I can feel it coming. And when that market happens, there'll be more scope to do it. I know I can't remember the name, but there's a Dutch couple that are breeding perennial kale now. But, you know, there's huge scope. Maybe here, you know, we'll collect seed. Natural farming is about collecting seed. And so hopefully after collecting perennial seeds for 5-10 years, we'll start to breed. Maybe they'll mix with the annuals a little bit as well. We don't know. So
amazing.
Yeah. Where
can people go to learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so we have our website, which is the woolsery.com. The company itself is called The Collective at Woolsery, so there's loads of information. My Instagram, which is Joshua_Sparks, so I post about the farm. We are going to start to run workshops, so we've got a couple coming up. So we've got a Syntropic one coming up in the spring, where it's 2 days of learning how to plant and the philosophy of Syntropic. But that will morph next year. We're actually going to run like a natural farming day, show people how we do our polycultures and how we make it work. And they're all going to be cost affordable to growers as well, which is really good, because we want as many people to do it as possible. So we just wanted to meet the costs of the cost to run it, and so we're going to be doing more of that really. So for that, Gardeners World on BBC iPlayer maybe if you want. But other than that, yeah.
Joshua, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for coming.